Welcome to Entrepreneurs International Network, where entrepreneurs learn, network, and grow. I'm Roger Killen, the organizer. Today, Tony Guarnaccia, did I get it right?
Sounded perfect.
Tony Guarnaccia is going to be training us on how to get interviewed on podcasts. Tony, I've got 3 questions that will help us get to know you at a more personal level than your talk. First question is, what impact would you like to have on planet Earth?
Yeah, I'm going to get into my story in a little bit with the presentation, but really my mission is to make podcasting profitable, and that goes back to kind of my broader mission, which is really to democratize marketing. So they're very much related, but it's really about making an impact for me, and I'll share exactly how I'm going to do that soon.
All right, beautiful. Second question, what is your favorite quote and why? What makes it your favorite?
Yeah, to me, good is the enemy of great, because I think a lot of times we settle and don't get to really where our real purpose is. And so I always think you have to have a big vision and do everything you can to attain that vision. And so that's why that's a very powerful quote, that don't settle. So don't let good be the enemy of great.
That's so true for us solopreneurs. Boy, do we ever think small when we're capable of big. Great quote. And finally, what is the best piece of advice that anyone has ever given you over the course of your life?
Yeah, I've actually been given the same advice by 2 people. One, my mother, who's an inspiration. I actually have a whole manifesto about this, but years ago, she, we had the pandemic recently, but in the late, 30s, she contracted polio and was unable to walk, and just had a very, challenging childhood that she overcame. And her vision was always to be able to kind of someday wear high heels. And what I learned from her was the power of taking small steps. Because what happened was originally, she had problems with her nervous system, had to work with clay to get strength. And then eventually she had to, swim, build more strength. Then she walked between poles, eventually to the point where she got to where she wanted to be. And so whenever I face a challenge, which we all do as solopreneurs, like I go back to that, like take small steps, small actions each day to achieve your success. And I had that similar training because believe it or not, I used to be a professional violinist. And when I was tackling a challenging piece, my violin teacher, who was internationally acclaimed, played at Carnegie Hall, Sony recordings, the whole bit, he told me the same advice. Break it down into small pieces. It wasn't small steps, so small pieces, learn it step by step, and then you're eventually going to get the momentum to get to where you want to be.
Great. I'm sure you're going to do that for us today.
That's exactly, yes. I'm going to dig into that for sure.
Good. Thank you, Tony. Now, participants, a few messages for you. Please turn on your video. Tony gets his energy from you, and it's not very energizing from his perspective if he's looking at a black box with a name in it. So if you can, please come on camera. Secondly, stay muted throughout Tony's presentation and type any questions you have into the chat. At about 10-minute intervals, I will aggregate the questions and ask Tony if this is a good time for him to answer your questions, and then we'll leapfrog forward. Rest assured, all your questions will get presented to Tony and replied by Tony. Now, you're going to be sent a link to the recording of Tony's talk. It'll likely be tomorrow, but I nevertheless encourage you to take notes, because the very act of taking notes is going to help what you absorb. Tony, are you ready to knock our socks off?
Absolutely. So excited to be here and appreciate the opportunity. So I will dig right in. That's okay.
And I will take myself. I will on-spot myself.
Perfect. Can you see my screen okay? Everyone see it?
See your screen. See you.
Perfect. All right, great. So I'm going to share today 3 surefire ways to grow your audience, income, and impact with podcast guest interviews, and really how to tap into the tremendous growth of podcasting without having to create a podcast. So what's nice is you get the benefits of it without having to actually create it. And so I'm sure many of us can answer this question nowadays, but do you know the fastest way to grow your audience, income, and impact? Well, you don't have to go far to see that this is how celebrities grow their influence. And what is through interviews. There's a reason why even the most well-known people do interviews. And so what is your goal? Really, what's nice about interviews is that they're powerful and they work across all three of the main goals you might have. Building awareness for what you're doing and what you're offering, building influence, so persuading people, building authority and trust, and also generating sales, generating income from your interviews. Interviews are powerful across all three of these. And so that's what we're going to dig into today, and really answer the question, how can you tap into this opportunity? So today you're going to learn the one system specifically designed to grow your audience, income, impact through podcast interviews. There is one problem, however. Most of us are not celebrities. So what I want to share is how to do this without having that huge audience or social media following, because this is really, again, part of what I mentioned before about democratizing marketing. So anyone can do this. And so historically, it's really been just for the gurus. Maybe if you're a star athlete, a politician, an actor, those are usually the people that have gotten the interviews in the past. But as you know, things have changed radically. We're now in a virtual world. So pretty much anyone has access to take advantage of this. And what that means is there's been a huge, tremendous shift to podcasting. So now podcasts are really being at the center of public relations efforts. Interviews, they used to just be on TV, national TV, radio interviews. Now they're shifting to podcasts. Even these big celebrities are doing podcast interviews. Speaking, a lot of it is going from offline, where it's historically been, to more and more podcasts. That's why we have so many speakers here today. Influencer marketing, same idea. And what's really nice about this is with podcasts, it's not just about the podcast, it's everything that comes out of that. So when you have a podcast or do an interview on a podcast, you can repurpose that content to be a blog post. You can generate income from it. You can get more visibility in other places, like through social media, by leveraging that same content. And it's a powerful way, probably one of the most powerful ways to build trust and authority. And one of the ways you do that, which we'll talk about, is like posting it to your website. And so podcast listening has really been growing tremendously. Just the numbers are going at an exponential rate. It's also expecting to explode, to go even further. So really, my opinion is we're really at the beginning of this. I remember years ago having a similar pattern with blogs. So blogs were kind of tiny. Then before you know it, there's hundreds of millions of them. Right now, there's just, it depends on the stat, around 1 million podcasts. And I think that's going to go at the same rate. So it's really one of the biggest opportunities, if not the biggest opportunity in marketing right now. And so there's a lot of money. If that's your goal, it may not be. You might want to just grow your influence or your impact, but a lot of us want to make money as well. And so there's a lot to be made if you can tap into that shift. So anytime there's a shift in a marketplace, that's a great opportunity for most of us. And so here's what we're going to cover today: how to get booked on podcasts, hundreds of podcasts for free, even if nobody knows who you are. We're going to look at how to increase your visibility with a new and engaged audience while establishing your credibility. And then we're going to talk about how to increase your website traffic and grow your email lists from the same effort. And finally, we're going to dig into how to quickly generate your first 5 sales from your interviews so that you're instantly profitable, because we want quick wins. We don't want this to take forever. And so why do you want to listen to me? A little bit of my story I mentioned. So what I learned years ago was that a lot of people just don't know what they don't know. And that's really what hurts them. So I grew up, as Roger was mentioning, I'm Italian. When I was a kid, we had a small Italian bakery up in Connecticut. And my parents were amazing bakers. Unfortunately, not the best business people. And so at the age of 12, we lost everything. We lost the car, the house. I had to give up my dog here in Tennessee to my sister. And so it was a really challenging time. And what I learned, and what I wanted to always become from that, was an entrepreneur, kind of to redeem the past. And so I started an online bakery where we could take a cake, put a photo on it, and ship it anywhere in the country. So you might see this in like a BJ's or a Walmart today. Back then, we were one of the first in the country to do it. And what was really unique is we could mail it. And so here I am. I launched this company right out of school, business school, and had a good amount of success. And so here I am with my father and my wife. And I thought I had arrived. I thought I was hot stuff. because I won a best new product at the New York Incentive Show at the Javits Center. I had big clients, big corporate clients. I even worked with celebrities, Jennifer Lopez, Jay-Z. I was asked to do the cookies for the Clinton Library, the opening of that. And here I am, young guy, thought I knew it all. That's why I learned that being the best doesn't mean you necessarily have success from a business perspective. So even though I had amazing PR, I had awards, I had celebrities, I had SEO, I was at the top of the search engines for birthday cake and corporate gifts, great marketing, a great reputation. That doesn't necessarily translate into financial success. And so I had lost everything at that point. I had lost everything all, and I was basically broke. So the business closed, had $35,000 of debt. I had to live in my sister's basement, and I was newly married to that beautiful wife you just saw there, with a baby on the way, who is now just about 18. And so this is kind of where I started. And so what I learned is I had to have a new plan. And what that plan was to work with the best so I could be the best. And so I took a journey to work for about 10 years with the market leaders in just about every niche you can imagine. So I worked with Ford and ADP and Chevrolet and just a lot of Fortune 500 companies, a lot of great small companies, and about 10,000 small businesses. And what I did and what I took, I really went from being broke with literally nothing to within 5 years, having Google's Agency of the Year, spending $400 million in ad spend. I worked with great brands, great companies, huge businesses. And what I did was I wrote a book about it. And what do you do when you write a book? Well, you go on a podcast book tour. And so what I did was in 2020, I did 86 podcast interviews and went on top podcasts, a lot of small ones as well, virtual summits. And I encountered a lot of people struggling with the same problems that general businesses had. So podcasters, people that were interviewing on podcasts, they were having the same problems as the big companies I've worked with, but a lot of the small businesses and solo entrepreneurs that I had discovered. And so really my book solved their problem as well. And that's why I learned really what was the secret to successful podcast interviews and how do I help this niche as well? And that's kind of when that became my purpose, was to go from just broad democratized marketing to really honed in on solving this problem of making podcasting profitable. And so what I learned, and just from doing this myself with the 86 interviews, is podcast interviews are really the fastest way that I could find to grow your audience, income, and impact. And the reason why is because they help increase your visibility, establish your credibility, direct traffic to your website, grow your email list and leads, build relationships with new audiences, and really help you make sales of your products and services. And so I learned you can achieve really all of that through interviews. And the best thing is it barely costs anything, because you have to basically have a microphone. You can even use your computer, and then you just jump on. And if you're a guest, you don't have all the costs of actually having a podcast. So it's a win-win because you're giving the host value, but it's really a huge win for you as the guest because it's just very low effort to enter into this. And so if that's the case, that sounds good, but why don't people interview them? If that's such a great idea, then why aren't more people doing it? And that really puzzled me. And here's a couple of reasons why I discovered. A lot of people don't have time. They don't even know where to start, which I think a lot of you are here today to solve that problem. They don't want to look silly. So how do I even ask someone to be on their podcast? Or maybe they don't have the right tools or systems. And so what I found, though, those are a few reasons. The biggest reason is just one more thing on their to-do list. And so all of us are so busy. And so that's when I thought, okay, there needs to be a new approach to doing this. It's got to be profitable. It's got to be easy. And it's got to only take a few minutes. Otherwise, people just aren't going to take action, because all the theory in the world is fantastic. But if you're not taking action, it's really not going to bear any fruit, any results. And so what's the secret of profitable podcast interviews? Well, you need to have the right formula. And here's the formula I discovered. You have to have the right offers delivered to the right audience with the right message, and then your results will explode. And it's kind of funny because listening to the past few folks with the questions and answer, this was kind of a recurring theme. So I think I'm definitely hitting on a lot of the problems here, and that's what we're going to solve today. So I'm very excited for that. And so this works no matter what stage you're at, whether you're just starting and maybe you're doing your first podcast interview, whether you've done a bunch of them, or if you've been a TEDx speaker and you want to expand your influence. This system works at every level. And so it took me a while to figure this out. I told you some of my backstory. but I've made every mistake in the book. Had the wrong audience or not defined it closely enough, the wrong offer, the wrong messaging, waste a lot of time and effort. And hopefully I can save you some of these expenses from what I've learned myself personally. And so here's the thing, you just need the right steps. And so how do you know which steps to take? This is where I'm going to talk about the momentum. I talked a little bit about momentum in the Q&A in the interview, but it's really about creating that flywheel effect. And so here's the flywheel I found that would work for you as a guest expert on podcasts. Number one, you want to grow your audience. Number two, you want to make an impact. And number three, ideally, you generate some income. I think we all want to do that. And so where do you start? This process works in two ways. One, you can manually do it. So this is a great place to start taking those notes that Roger mentioned. Or two, you can automate with the system I have. So it's completely automated. So it's totally up to you. Either way, you're going to hopefully get some value out of this. And so here's the lessons we're going to talk about. Number one, how to quickly grow your audience with barely any effort or cost. Lesson number two, how to 10x the impact of your podcast interviews in less than 10 minutes. And I'm going to show you a really simple hack to do that. And then number three, the fastest way to generate income from podcast interviews so that you're instantly profitable. And so let's dig into the first one, how to quickly grow your audience with barely any effort or cost. So how do you grow your audience? Well, I think we've discovered podcast interviews are the way to do that. But what do podcasters look for in a guest? That's the natural next question. So okay, I want to do podcast interviews. That's my goal. So to do that, I have to get on podcasts and influence to some extent the podcasters. Like, what are they looking for? And so here's kind of a snapshot of what they want. Number one, they want to know you're likable. You have to have a good kind of presence that will convey your message. You want to be known. It's even better if you're known. So if you have a following, that's great. Whether it's on social media, an email list, that's always better. Not necessary, but it's a great thing to have. You want to have trust. That's a huge one. You want to come across as being credible. And so that's very, very important. Here's kind of probably the most important. You want to add value. So anywhere you're going and you're interviewing, just like hopefully I'm doing here today, you want to add value to other people's lives because that's going to help you build all the other components. And then finally, you want to have clear next steps. You want to make sure that you're communicating what you want the listener to do as a next step and also loop the host into that same conversation. And so that's fantastic. But the biggest thing, what's the one biggest thing for a podcaster when they're interviewing someone? Well, it's really simple. They want guests that are prepared. That is by far the most important thing. And so how do you define that? Like, I don't like abstract terms. I like to be very specific. So what does it mean to be prepared? Well, for a podcaster, we talked about you being likable. Well, that translates into your stories. I already told you several stories here today. I told you about my mother. I told you about my violin teacher. I told you about my backstory. So I've already used a lot of stories myself. You want to be known. This translates into your web presence and your social media presence. They want to know that you're trusted. Well, that a lot of times comes down to the results you've gotten for others in the past, your experience, and both at two levels, really your experience in your practice of what you're doing, but also your experience on other podcasts can be a powerful influencer for getting booked on more. Then you want to add value. Well, how do you do that? The best way to demonstrate that is through the topics and questions you're going to handle on that podcast interview. And then finally, that clear next step. This is where your offer comes into play, as well as collaboration opportunities with the host or the podcaster. So how do guests determine this? Like, how does that's a lot of stuff. Like, how do they actually know that guests are prepared? Well, this is also pretty simple. What they do is they ask for your podcast one sheet, very standard thing in the industry. And so the reason being is because your one sheet contains all of your stories that we just talked about, your web and social links, your results and experience, your topics and questions, and your offers and collaboration opportunities. That is really what goes on your one sheet. And the way to think about it, it's kind of like a resume, but instead of a resume for getting booked on a job interview, it's a resume for getting booked on a podcast interview. That's really the difference. And so what you want to do is you want to have all those components put together and then put into a one sheet. And so the reason being is when you have a podcast one sheet, you demonstrate that you were prepared to get interviewed. It's really that easy. So
Tony, are you open to a question?
yeah, absolutely.
Question from Marilyn. It's really a local question. How does Marilyn find a podcast that caters to her local Nashville market?
Yeah, we're actually going to answer that question very specifically. So you're a couple slides ahead of me, but yes, we're going to definitely hit on that in a minute.
No further questions. Back to you, Tony.
All right, fantastic. All right, so we talked about it's important to be on podcasts. Then we talked about what are they looking for, and we talked about how it's a podcast one sheet. Now, how do you actually create yours? And so I'm going to share with you exactly how to do that. So what I learned and what I did my first time doing podcast interviews, I had a PDF built for me, and I had an agency build it, and it was nice, but there was a couple challenges with it. Like, what do I put in it? Like that's a big one. And even with me having almost 30 years experience in marketing, I wasn't even sure quite what to put in for my bio and my topics and questions, and that was a problem. Another problem I had was like, okay, how do I design this thing? So I had the graphic designer do it. There was just a lot to it. And that's kind of when I thought in my head, can I make software that could automate this whole process of the creation of podcast one sheets? And that's really when podcast one sheet was born. That's how I started this, which is kind of like a child company of Castosity. They're related. And so what the system can do is it can automate that creation. And what's really nice is you can do different designs. So if you're like, I talk about marketing, but I also talk about podcasting. So I have two different podcasts, one sheets that look completely different topics, different questions, depending on who I'm speaking to, because you always want to match your audience as a guest. And so how do you create your one sheet? And as I mentioned before, this is a system that can be automated, but it doesn't matter. If you want to manually do this and create a PDF, it still works. So pay attention to these different steps because they're going to come in very handy no matter how you do this. So how does your podcast once you get your interviews? Well, there's really 3 steps. So I just had that question about find. That's actually the second one we're going to hit on. The first one, before you find the podcast, you have to be prepared for the podcast. And that's where the creation of your one sheet comes into play. Then you find those podcasts. And the last step is to pitch those podcasts so you get booked on them. It's really that simple. So how do you create your podcast one sheet? That's the first thing we're going to hit on. So in our system, again, you can do this on your own with Canva even, but in our system, you can just pick a template. There's dozens that are being launched and it'll change the design. So that's the first thing you want to do is figure out, okay, what is this going to want to look like? And what I always suggest is you incorporate your brand. And so the way we do it within the system is we help you, you can add your own photo. So you want to have a professional headshot. I like to have a logo. So I have my own branded logo because one of the things the system gets into is the idea of personal branding. And so for my own personal branding, I have a Tony G logo. And then the other thing you want to keep in mind is what is your colors and also what are the fonts you want to have associated with your personal brand. So that's kind of where you choose that template. So whether you're doing it here or you're doing it somewhere else, those are pretty much the 4 things you want to take into consideration. And so you can kind of see how I have it here. You just upload your logo, your colors, and your fonts. Now, the next thing is you want to add your bio, your topics, and your questions. And so what's really nice about this, again, I struggled with this myself. And I thought, okay, if I'm struggling, so a lot of other people must be. So I create a little system in this to actually create your messaging. So it's kind of step by step, you put in your name, helps who. So I know the couple questions we had before, a lot of people had a hard time narrowing down their audience and communicating to that audience. This pretty much solves that problem, but you can kind of see a very simple pattern here. You, meaning your name. So I would say Tony helps who? Well, who are you trying to help? So who's on this call today? Well, we have solo entrepreneurs, we have healers, we have coaches. So I might say Tony helps coaches and healers to do what? To get booked on podcast interviews. So you would swap out the what here with your own personal what. Here's another thing that's very important from a persuasion perspective. So they can what? Why? Like what's getting them stuck? So for this might be so you can grow your audience, income, and impact. And how? Through, well, the first way I'm helping you do that is through your podcast one sheet. So my creative messaging might be something like Tony helps solo entrepreneurs, healers, coaches, etc. to do what? Get booked on podcast interviews so they can grow their audience, income, impact through getting through a podcast one sheet. So that's a really quick synopsis of how you do it, but it's that simple. So if you can just fill in the blanks, this message builder will actually create it for you automatically and incorporate it into your one sheet. So the next thing you need to do is figure out your topics. Like what topics are you going to talk about? So similar process. The way I think about topics is almost like a book. these are the chapters for your book. So you want to, I think someone earlier mentioned breaking down the process. Same idea here. You want to take someone from where they are to ultimately where they want to be. You break that down into different steps. Those steps can be your topics. And then from there, your questions are kind of sub bullets of the topics. So each of the topics, I suggest coming up with 3 questions relevant to that topic. Boom, you have your podcast one sheet ready to go. That's pretty much all you have to do. That and add your bio. And then finally, you customize it. So what I do, and again, you would have to do this outside this system if you wanted to, but if you use this system, podcast one sheet, you just hit a couple buttons and you can change the design on the fly. So it's very flexible. What I believe is the more customized and personalized you are to an individual podcast, the more likely you are to get booked. So what I like to do is I create multiple one sheets, and depending on who I'm talking to, I'll actually make the questions and the topics specific to them, as well as sometimes the design. So that's the first area. Now we're going to dig into how to find the podcast that will interview me. So that's the next question people have. Okay, I want to do podcasts. Now I know how to with the one sheet. Now the next thing is, how do I actually find these? Like, how do I find the ones that will actually interview me? And so I've actually built a tool for this. It's actually completely free. So everything I've shown you, most of it, except for the design editing, is free, completely free. But one of the really tools that I have that I built is a podcast finder. And so this starts, and we had this conversation a little bit earlier too, with identifying your audience. So before you do any of this, you have to be very crystal clear on who exactly your audience is. But if you want a shortcut, which is what the tool does, what I would do is put in 2 topics. So if I was talking about getting podcast interviews, that might be my first topic. If my other topic was personal branding, that might be my second topic. So that's what you do. You literally put that in the search tool. It'll find all the podcasts that handle that topic, so that you can then reach out to them and pitch them to be interviewed, which of course you use a pitch template, which we provide in your one sheet to do that. The other way, which is a super ninja trick, is to put in a guest that's similar to you. And so at the local level, maybe you put in a local restaurant and see what podcasts they've been in. Maybe you put in a local food critic in there. That's a great way, or news station. News stations a lot of times have, they'll interview people. So you can put those people in. So you put in someone that's like you, that's doing something similar. And then this search tool will find all the podcast finder, it's called, will find all the podcasts that interviewed that person in the past. And then you reach out to those same people, because success begets success. If they had success with one guest that's similar to you, likely to do that with you the next time. And so here it is. So I just made up one for marketing SEO, but one topic might be internet marketing, SEO. Maybe I put my name in, or maybe an influencer in that space like Ryan Dice. And then the results will come out over here. You click this and then it'll pop up. Now the last part, okay, I have the one sheet to get booked. I just found the websites I want, or the podcasts I want to be booked on. How do I pitch them? Well, what you want to do is have a template. And so I typically send out 3 pitch emails. And so what this system does is actually pulls in your topics and questions dynamically into this pitch, and you just hit a button and it goes right out automatically. And so that's the way I do it. But nonetheless, if you want, you can screen capture this page. This is a really good template that you can use to get pitched on podcasts, and you just swap out all the information with your own, and then you're good to go. So you can see dynamically, I pull in the host name. So you want to make sure it's personalized per host. You want to put in their first name and your first name, and then be very specific with your expertise, so that's really coming across as having value. And of course, you link your one sheet to this as well, so they can kind of look at your resume. So here's what I used to do. So I used to have a graphic designer build these for me. I had a copywriter write the copy, a web designer to post it online, a social media specialist to kind of handle the marketing of it, a virtual assistant to do the outreach, and a project manager kind of to keep track of all this. So I used to have a marketing agency of about 20 people that did a lot of this for me. Now, and now it's automated, but the biggest win is time. Like, we can never get more time. And so one of my biggest frustrations was doing a podcast one sheet as a PDF was that anytime I needed to make a change, it would have to go back to the designer. It would take a while. Then I had to review it, make sure it's spelled correctly. Now I just put it in myself, and it's done in seconds. And so honestly, I built the tool for myself. And then I was like, hey, I bet a lot of other people would want it. So that's kind of how I started down this road. People love it. So I'm pretty excited about that. So that's the first one, is audience. Is there any questions you want me to handle before we get into the next one, which is impact, which I think will be really, really impactful for everyone here?
Yes. The first question is, how do I connect with specific health podcasts?
Yeah, I just mentioned that. Use the search tool. So what you do is put in your topics relevant to health, put in other people that are similar to you, that are in your niche, which is easy enough to find. You can use LinkedIn, look at periodicals, online blogs, find the influencers in that space. I would start with the smaller ones if you haven't done this before. And then you put them in the search tool, and there you go.
So you're being asked several times for a link to the search tool.
You'll get that at the end, but you can get access to all this by going to podcastonesheet.com.
Okay, several similar questions, and they all revolve around, I've done a bunch of podcasts and nothing has happened. There've been no sales. What am I doing wrong?
You have not listened to lesson 3 yet, which is income. We're going to hit on that very specifically.
Okay. How far should we be planning between pitch and booking?
Well, typically the book out, it ranges. I've had people have me on their show days later. I've had other people that book out almost a year. Generally, the bigger the show, the further out, because they just have a lot more influence. The smaller ones, if you just want to start there, you can a lot of times get booked within the month for sure.
And Francesca wants to know, do you have any nonprofit pricing?
Most of what I showed you actually is free.
Well, that's pretty nonprofit pricing. No further questions. Back to you, Tony.
Sure. Okay, so now we're going to look at how to 10x the impact of your podcast interviews in less than 10 minutes with one simple hack. And so this is something I think will really resonate with all the folks here, because I've heard this problem over and over again in the Q&A. And so what do the greatest speakers have in common? Well, they're great communicators. A lot of this starts with your communication. So being able to clearly communicate your message is probably the most critical skill you can develop as a guest. And the reason being is because your impact, and all of us want to make an impact. A lot of us, even the nonprofits, that's the one thing we can all agree on. We want to make impact. If we don't want to make income, most of us are in this world for a purpose, and we want to make an impact. And that impact, love it or hate it, is a lot of times determined by how well you communicate your message. And so I mentioned this before, I struggled with this on my area myself, even being in marketing for 25, 30 years. I struggled with how do I come up with my topics, my questions, my bio. So I used a Word document or Google Drive document in this case, try to figure out what do I put in there, and I struggled. And so I figured others must be. I think listening to the group here, I think I'm on point, because a lot of us just don't know how to communicate specifically who we're serving and how we're different and why it's important. And so how you communicate message is really broken down to these 3 things. The first thing you want to do, which someone gave this great advice a little while ago, you need to identify your audience very specifically. The next thing you need to do is create your messaging around that audience, tailored to that audience. And the third thing you need to do is spread that message out as much as possible, which podcast interviews are certainly part of that strategy. But this what I'm teaching here really applies to anything. It's the same thing that would go on your website or your social media or anywhere. And so it starts with identifying your ideal audience. And so we have a tool that actually helps you do that. It's called the Audience Builder. And within this, you create what's called a persona. So you identify who you're serving. And persona is kind of a scary word. It's really just a profile of who they are. And this system makes it very simple. And you can choose based on a variety of categories. Maybe it's a financial thing if you're in that realm. Maybe it's a health thing if you're in that realm. It's really tailored to, there's literally a toggle where you can say the niche you're in, and it'll specify it to there. But the key thing to know and understand is you first define who you're serving. Then, and here's a real example. So the tool will say, okay, what's their education? Are they financially secure? What's their net worth? So that would apply to someone that's maybe targeting individuals, maybe for financial consulting. But there's other similar boxes like this if you're in health or other areas. Then you have to determine why they need you. Like, what pain are you trying to solve? What problem do they have? Because at the end of the day, people are buying transformation. You take someone from where they are at point A, and you want to take them to point B, maybe all the way out to point Z. But that's really what you need to communicate is where you're going to transform them. And so ultimately you want to transform them with your products and services, but you also want to transform them partially within your podcast interview. So you need to take them, maybe if you're trying to take someone from A to G, you need to take them on the podcast from A to C. So just going back to what I learned, those small steps, you have to give them you have to know, first of all, the small steps, map out those small steps and know what are the small steps they need to take and hear and learn in the interview, and what's the ones they have to do once they maybe get your offer, and then what's the next steps after they work with you. And so that's the why, like what problem are you trying to solve? And then where have you experienced this? This is where your stories come into play. And so we have a whole system in here that teaches that, but essentially what is your stories that exemplify the problem that you help your clients solve or your customers, and how have you demonstrated their success? What's that transformation? So real simple. I don't want to overcomplicate this. Whose problem do you solve, and why do they need you? That's it. You need to know those two questions to able to get customers or clients like we talked about, but you need to also know those answers to those questions for your podcast interviews. So how do you create your messaging? Well, we have a system, I alluded to it before, but it's all templated. So we have templates for how do you create your stories? How do you create your topics? How do you create your questions? How do you create your tagline? How do you create your bio? And how do you create your intro? So we have all this templated for you, and you literally just put in simple questions like you might have learned in grade school. Who, what, when, where, how, why. If you can answer those simple questions, which you need to as a business owner, then you're good to go. And so that's how the system works. And we have a tool that does that for you. And so what I want you to think about next is what problem do you solve and why they choose you. So you need to differentiate yourself. So you know what you're doing, why it's important, like why they need to solve that problem. Now you have to answer the question, why would they choose you as opposed to anyone else, or do nothing at all? And so that's the last part of that messaging. The final part is, okay, you've identified your audience, you've created your messaging. Now you need to spread that message. So how do you do that? Well, you want to certainly incorporate it into your one sheet, which happens automatically. So for instance, I have my tagline here, which is my mission. This time it's not a tagline, but it's a mission in this case. But my mission is to make podcasting profitable. Then over here is my intro. And I also have one that's a bio, very similar. The intro is usually shorter, but then you want to take that messaging, and these are really the 5 primary ones. Your bio, which can be used for intro, a long bio, which is really for someone to figure out if they want to book you as a guest, your brand positioning, your tagline, and your pitch. That's really all you need. And again, it's just simple who, what, when, where, why questions. And then you take that message and you spread that. So don't just put it in your one sheet, incorporate that messaging in your interviews. Put it on your website, put on your in your social media. If you're advertising, incorporate your messaging there in your intros and pitches, and certainly in your one sheet. So you really can use this. So this is not just a one sheet issue, it's a marketing and business issue. You want to really leverage this as many places as possible. And so the tool helps you a lot. Now you don't need Canva because you're not using that. A scheduler, we got a scheduler built in this. So there's a whole bunch of things. But to me, the biggest value is just the time it saves, because I don't have to figure this out from scratch because it's already done. So that's lesson 2. So we talked about how to grow your audience and find those podcasts. Then we just talked about your messaging, which is really how you build your personal brand and deliver that impact that we're all looking to do. The last thing we're talking about is how to grow your income. So before I dig into that, is there any questions you want me to hit on?
Yes, question from Jason. How should you structure a commercial for your business and your podcast? And another question is also, what is the best way to attract sponsors for your podcast show?
Yeah, great questions. Okay, so this is really this conversation here is really directed to the guests, people that want to be a guest. If you want to learn on how to get sponsors, I actually have this is Podcast One Sheet, which really serves guests. I have the Sponsorship Wizard, which serves people that are podcasters and want to book sponsors and guests. And the umbrella company is called Castosity. So if you go to castosity.com and enter your email there, I'm going to have a very similar training to this, but it's on the podcast host side. So go there and I can walk you through how to create a sponsorship strategy. In terms of a commercial, messaging is messaging. So whatever messaging you have here can certainly be applied into commercials or anywhere else. But the key thing is to understand who you're serving, what problem do they have to solve, and what makes you unique. Those are probably the first three you want to start with. Incorporate that wherever you have a message to spread.
Jude wants to know, do you help your client create the one sheet, or do we have to do it alone?
Yeah, there's three levels to this. There's one where you do it yourself, and that's what I'm showing you here. You literally, but it's very simple. It's fill in the blank. Then we also have trainings where it walks you through step-by-step how to do that. And then the last level is there's actually group coaching. So you can go in and it's about 3 hours long and we walk you through step-by-step. We also have a challenge coming out very soon. That's how to get 5 interviews in 5 days. And I'm going to be going through a lot of the process, but there's really levels for everyone where you can be, we'll hold your hand as much as you need.
Great. No further questions, Tony, back to you.
All right. Thank you so much. So last part, okay, this is one that really gets me excited, a lot of people excited. The fastest way to generate income from podcast interviews so that you're instantly profitable. And so what's the one thing that you need to generate income through interviews? Well, it's very simple. Offers. Offers are really how you generate interview income. And so that leads to the question, okay, if that's true, how do I actually create offers? And this is where people get stuck, because I hear the question all the time, hey, I've gone on a podcast, haven't got results, haven't got any sales. What's the disconnect? And so you need to create offers. And so there's really a process to doing that. And there's 3 steps to it. Number 1, how you structure your offer is critical. Number 2, how can people actually redeem it? And then 3rd, which is probably the most important, how is it actually getting promoted? And so the first thing we want to look at is how do you structure your offers? And so within the system, again, you don't have to use the system. These are basic trainings, but what I'm teaching here is very, very valuable. It took me 30 years to learn. So the first thing you want to look at is the type of offer. And there's really 3 general types of categories of offers. Number 1, it could be a gift. This is something like I'm doing here. I'm giving access to this software to all of you for free. And so that's a gift. Then you have prizes. This is something that someone might win. So, maybe you have some kind of high value product, you can give away 1 out of 100, just throwing a number out there. And then the last one is deals. So deals are where you have a discount to something. Those typically do not convert well on a podcast because people just don't want to have a pitch fest. You need to add and lead with value. That's really what builds the relationships that drive the sales in the end. And so what I recommend is typically doing a gift. I think prizes might be a good opportunity in the future, but right now I would stick with gifts. The next thing you have to do is figure out what's the format of that gift. And so I mentioned one, which is price discount, really not the best way to go, but it is available within the system. Discount offer, also not the best idea, but it's also available if you choose to do that. The third one on the list over here, if you can see it, I don't know if you, right, I'm just circled it here, is trials. So giving someone a trial offer for maybe a premium version. So we actually, as a matter of fact, we have a premium version of Podcast One Sheet. And so we sometimes do trials for that. Then there's order and delivery incentives, maybe free shipping, accelerated shipping, add-ons, which is maybe, hey, if you buy, I'll just throw something out there. If you buy the software, you get the content with it, you get the training with it. Events, if you have a virtual summit, you might be promoting that. A book tour, so if you're launching a book at a certain time or launching a product, that would be a type of event. But really the most popular, which is the one that's highlighted here, is content. So typically from a podcast, you're going to promote some sort of content. Usually, it's a course, maybe it's a book, maybe it's a white paper or a checklist. But what I really recommend is something that just leads the listener to the very next step. And here's the most important thing. It's got to be quick and easy to consume. So you don't want someone to read a whole book or a white paper or a guide or something. A checklist is great because it's very fast acting, or something like I have here where I have software where someone can immediately get a result that's successful out of it. That's the best way to do it, a quick win. And so That's the first part of it. Now, the second part is, how does someone actually redeem it? So you have to have these three things, or else you're not going to have success. So when someone asks, well, why are my offers converting? It's really these three things. And beyond that, it's really, there's the reason why someone won't convert. It's usually because their offer isn't good. Like I just addressed now, maybe you're asking someone to buy when they shouldn't be. Maybe it's you're targeting the wrong audience. So are you on the right podcast? And is there enough people on that podcast from a percentage perspective to take action? And then the third part is your messaging. If you don't have good messaging, all this else falls apart, which is why that was one of the first things I taught, because you have an amazing offer, but if you can't communicate it, then you're not going to have success. So you need those three things in order. So that's the first thing, is you want to have the structure of the offer. The next thing is, how do people actually redeem it? Again, very simple. What you want to do is have a landing page. That's where I would start, is making sure you have a landing page where someone actually can access it, and have a dedicated landing page for that specific offer. Don't just send someone to your homepage. Then you want to have an offer code. Offer codes are fantastic because A, it's a way to track it yourself. B, it's a way for the host to track results, especially if you do affiliate or joint ventures, which we'll touch on in a minute. And then also, it's a great way for to provide like extra value or a discount to the listener. And so those are kind of the three main reasons to do that. You want to be very specific on how someone can actually access it. Just like I'm doing here, you go to podcastonesheet.com. You want to be able to very clearly communicate exactly what you want the listener to do. And then it's always good to have urgency and scarcity. So maybe you're only doing this for a certain amount of time. Maybe there's only so many available. And so for us, at some point very soon, we're going to a premium version. Right now, it's free for everybody. And so it's a good time to get in now because we're fairly new. And so with the software, that's kind of my urgency and scarcity.
Tony, time for a couple of questions.
Sure.
As an author, would a PDF 5-page excerpt from my book be a good option?
Yes. I mean, that's in fact what I did in the past. I did for my book, Small Steps to Big Profits. I did a manifesto called the Small Steps Manifesto, which you can get for free actually at smallstepsmanifesto.com if you want to see what I did. But yeah, that's a great way to do it as well.
So same person is asking, or a discount offer with code to add at checkout when purchasing my book?
Well, typically what you want to do is what's called a funnel. So what I would suggest is give someone something free on the front. Actually, as a matter of fact, with this, just to be transparent, if you get the podcast one sheet, the next screen gives you the opportunity to get a course on how to actually fill this out. Like I mentioned, someone had the question before, I actually had that in a funnel. So they get something free and they get something that's elective, totally elective. You don't have to get it, but someone can get that. So what I would do, instead of saying someone directly to buy something with discount, I would have something free, because again, you want to lead with value. You don't want to just be extracting money without adding value first. And so always lead with something free is my advice.
Does your system know how many listeners the podcasts have?
Not yet, but we are working with integrations with Libsyn, like pretty much all the biggest hosting companies, and we'll have that data soon. And we're also going to be pulling in their social media traffic, because here's the other secret, which I'll get into in the next section, is don't just look at their listeners. It's got to be quality listeners. So you could theoretically have 3 people on a podcast, but if it was Bill Gates and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, it probably wouldn't be, they certainly have the money to buy whatever you have. And so, don't let that dissuade you, but also you have to look broader. Do they have an email list? Can they send to that? Do they have social media traffic? So you have to look at it holistically, which is what I'll get into in this next section.
Lauren wants to know why discounts are not a good idea.
I mean, it can be, but typically people have to have a higher level of trust with you. They do have a certain amount of trust just from the fact of you being on the podcast. So you can borrow a certain amount of trust from the host, but I like to lead them more slowly down the path. But like anything, I say test it. If what I would do is go on a couple of smaller podcasts, test your offer out and see which one works better. Because sometimes I have seen people in the with nutrition, selling pills and some things to that effect, do really well with discounts. It really depends on your product. But if you're a coach or something to that effect and you give a discount, or just say, I'll give you a coaching call or assessment, those typically aren't great because it telegraphs basically a sales pitch.
And the last question, how do you adapt your podcast approach to a specific field of expertise? In the case of the questioner, I'm not sure what that is. Okay, the generic question is, how do you adapt your approach to podcasting?
It was just one statement above.
What is it, Helena?
It was just the one statement above that in counseling, the problem with fast and easy in the counseling field is that an attitude and stance is quite the opposite of that fast and easy lens.
Tony, do you understand the question? Because I don't.
Well, it sounds to me like you're saying if it's something that can't be solved easily, how do you handle that?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not fast and easy. And
Yeah,
you kind of set people up for that mindset, which is counterintuitive.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So again, I would break it down to the next step. So if you have to you want to take them to the very, like for instance, there was a chiropractor I knew a while ago, and they would have you like bend over or something. And when you did it a certain way and hit something, it would immediately alleviate that pain. And so even though you're not actually solving the problem, it's triggering in their head how it was solved quickly. And so what I would look at is like, okay, what's the whole process? Maybe in your first counseling session, like how do they, have some kind of win out of that? That's what you're going to want to talk about on the show as a guest. And so anything you can communicate, or even showing them that they do have a problem, or even showing them that, hey, this can be solved, something that takes them through. So maybe if it's something that's a longer sales cycle, this might be where you don't necessarily solve that problem, but you show where you solved someone else's, so they can get their, they can see themselves in the other person's shoes. So from a content perspective, I think it's in the system.
Right, and then the
right
rest
here would
is
be a
you've
case
already
study.
built the trust.
Yeah, so you want to build trust. So in your case, it's not in here, but what you want to do for content might be a case study. So if you can take someone very similar to that person that's had the same problems, and you can, at the end of the day, you have to show success. Ideally, you show their success very quickly with a quick win. If you can't do that, then you want to borrow someone else's success, maybe ideally a client of yours. And if that's not possible, you want to borrow someone else's success outside of that. So maybe there's someone well known that's been through that problem with the same kind of solution you're providing that's had success. So
Perfect.
That's the key thing, is you have to show success somewhere, ideally for them personally. If you can't do that, from someone else you've helped. And if you can't do that, from an external third party, like I'm doing today, I showed you the growth of podcasting. So maybe I can't show you your specific growth in podcasting, but I can show anecdotes of what's happening in an industry-wide perspective.
Okay, you rock. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Tony, you have 6 minutes left.
All right, perfect. So let's go into the last one then, which is send them to a landing page. So kind of to give you a small specific step, you want to offer to send them to a landing page. So incentives to subscribe. So one of your goals should be, and one of the reasons I don't go for a direct sale or a discount is because podcasting is one of the greatest ways to build your email list. And so if you do that, if you're just trying to get the sale, you only have one chance to get that sale if you're doing it directly. If you're trying to get someone as a subscriber, once they're an email subscriber of yours, you can message them over and over again. So you just have more opportunities. So the last part is that, okay, I have all this down. How does someone actually promote the offer? And so what you want to take into account, and within the system, the way I do is I have an offer. I can track all the podcasts where I've interviewed, what offer I provide them, because I have several offers. And then I can look at, okay, who, how, when, and where, like who's promoting it? How are they promoting it? Is it just the podcast? If they're just doing it to podcast, you're not going to get a high conversion rate. They really should be doing an email promotion as well, before the podcast, after the podcast. They should do social media. All those things are much more tangible, so it's easier to get a conversion. A lot of people are listening to podcasts while they're working out, while they're driving, harder to get a conversion there. But if you pair that with something else like social media and email from the host, that becomes much more powerful. But you have to ask your question, well, why would they do that? Why would a host do all this extra effort if there's really nothing in it for them? And that's really where the strategy of doing a joint venture or affiliate offer with them comes into play. So what I personally do, not in this case, because Roger's, he's generous, but a lot of times when I'm on a podcast, I'll give a percentage of the revenue that I earn to the host. And so that's a very powerful way to make sure you're getting conversions, because it's not just going out through one channel, being, podcast. The more channels you can send your message to, the more impact you're going to have, the more influence you're going to have, because more people are going to see it, but ultimately the more sales you're going to have. And so that's why it's very important to take this and have an upfront conversation with the host and say, okay, where else can we promote this? What are you open to doing? Or maybe after it's aired, sometimes it doesn't happen because you don't have time and you just get booked. What I always do is have a debriefing call. So after the podcast, you want to stay on for a few minutes, or maybe even before the podcast. And these are called green room conversations. So you have that conversation, and there is where you can say, okay, what can we do to take this to the next level? I know we recorded it. Is it possible to also send a promotion, an email, to make sure my offer is in the show notes, because that's how it gets distributed to Apple and Google and everywhere. And that your offer is going to then come up in the search engine results. So it's really about distributing, syndicating your message out and your offer out to as many places as possible. That's a lot of times why people don't have success. And so here's how that works within the system. I can track each podcast with a different offer code, although this time I put the same one in, but this is just a demo screen, but I always use a different offer code based on the podcast. And it's that simple. So let me just kind of tie this together. And I mentioned the importance of doing joint venture affiliates. There's a whole other program for that. As a matter of fact, Iman has a special program with this where he's giving access to, if you get the premium level, to the JV community, which is like $1,000. So if you're interested in that, email me, I'll let you know about it. But that's how you get the income. So let me kind of tie this together and show, okay, how does it actually work together? Because I like to have very specific plans. Like, it's great to have abstract ideas, but you have to really have it down as a plan. And so at the end of the day, I want you to think beyond, kind of the next things we talked about, like over the next 2 weeks or really over the next 2 months. What can you expect if you work the system like this? And really show you how this system, if you choose to use it, will automate your short-term wins. And another way to put it is really, what can you expect? Like, how would this work? So here's where I'm heading. What you want to do is you want to grow your listeners by 100 to 500 per episode. You do that by reaching new audiences with your interviews. Then your goal should be to have an impact. So you do that by growing and getting 3 to 15 new offers redeemed. Again, these are not sales. These are typically offers, like a piece of content. And this is how your message can have a direct impact on those listeners beyond just the podcast. And then income. The goal could be to get 1 to 5 sales per interview at, say, $500. Now, everyone has a different offer. Some may be low ticket, some may be higher ticket, some may be recurring. Maybe you get that every month. It really depends on you specifically, but the idea is you want to sell your product and services, and ideally do that through joint ventures and affiliate sales. If you just did this, you should be able to make $500 to $2,500 per interview, depending on the shows you're on. Out of the gate, you probably won't do this because you need to get familiar with how to communicate. You have to go through all the process I just shared. You don't want to go on huge podcasts right away because that can really hurt your credibility more than help it. But you want to start small. Now, let's say if we do that same math, but we do 4 interviews a month, you really got that flywheel going. So you grow your listeners by 1 to 500 per month, you reach new audiences. You do the same 3 to 15 offers for each show. Then you get 1 to 5 sales each month at $500 through those affiliate sales. Then you're starting to get significant income, and you can really get that momentum. And this is exactly the playbook I'm using to launch the software. So this isn't even theory. This is exactly what I've done myself and what I'm doing right here with you. And so what I always say is, what if I do go from 4 to maybe 8 interviews? Now, 1 year I did 86. So there's a lot you can do. If you increase the number of interviews, it just gets that more powerful. And the other benefit is you're building your influence. So if you Google my name, Tony Guarnaccia, you'll see page after page of things that help build my credibility, because it's all positive stuff from interviews. And so, some of us may not be able to attain that. I always say have a big vision, but even if you don't attain your end vision, if you even get halfway there, would it make an impact in your own personal life? And for most of us, it would be yes. And so you have to think, can you be successful doing this? Even if you did a portion of it, I think most of us could. And so you might be wondering, how do you tap into this? I already shared earlier how you do it, but it's very simple. You go to podcastonesheet.com. You can get access to this. We will be charging for it in the future, but right now it's completely free. We do have a premium version as well. That's not free, where you can change the designs, where you can do a bunch of extra fancy stuff, but the core things I shared with you are all available within the system for free. So that's it. I really appreciate you joining me. I hit it right at 2, and appreciate you having me here today. Thanks so much.
Tony, thank you hugely. You've taken a pretty darn complicated subject and you've distilled it down into a very easy step-by-step process. So EIN 73,000 members, thank you to the moon and back.
Thank you. My pleasure. I really appreciate you having me here today. And if anyone has questions, you can contact me. When you go to Podcast One Sheet, you actually get one of the emails I will go to you is a link to me from me personally. So it's not like an automated thing. It's actually me. And you can email me if we have any questions that we weren't able to hit on just now.